recording now. Yes. Our first class, we saw that post-impressionism is not all the same. It's not like just a post-impressionism, but it's an umbrella term we use for a lot of different movements that we see in art beginning in the middle of the 1880s and moving forward from there over the next couple of decades. But primarily 1880s and 1890s. And we saw that with Gauguin, with Van Gogh and Cezanne, that there were quite different ways in which artists were reacting against impressionism, finding a new direction now that the impressionist group had stopped exhibiting in 1886. And within this, another sort of subgroup, if you look at it, is the symbolist group. And unlike Van Gogh and unlike Cezanne, both of whom wrote about what they were trying to achieve, the symbolists were a group that had a manifesto. That was, and a manifesto is a doctrine, right? A statement of doctrine, if you will. This is what we're committed to doing. And it included primarily poets, but also artists. It really was a literary movement to begin with. And that was published the same year as the last Impressionist exhibition, which was 1886. Right? And it basically said that they're going to try to take inward thoughts, the things that exist inside of us, and make them visible to others. Right? Take the subjective and make it objective. Rather than looking at the world outside of us in a subjective way. Right? That's the long and the short of it. And for subject matter, they looked toward pieces of literature, parts of human history, that dealt with the supernatural, because that metaphysical area is about the world that we can't see. Right? And they're trying to divorce themselves from being directed by the visible world. Right? So spirituality, supernaturality, even the occult becomes fair game and a major focus for the symbolists, right? And as we were talking, and especially looking at Rodin, who was elected as the leader of the first symbolist group of painters in Paris. When they got together, they didn't call us we were the symbolist painters. They said we were some crazy thing like the long-winded thing, the independent artists of blah, 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 blah. And our first president will be Orion Didot, because he had already been doing this stuff. And what's interesting about this, I think, with the symbolists, and one of the things that separates them as a group from other post-impressionists and from the impressionists is this interest in narrative themes, literary themes, right? The mythology of Pandora, for example, right? Ancient Greek mythology. What are the impressionists interested in? There's no storytelling there, right? There's just people hanging out in the park with a cute umbrella and nice windows and cloud flying, or boats in a harbor, the play of light, a train coming into a station without telling the story of somebody being in it. Beatrice, relating back to the story of Dante and his lost love of Beatrice. These are very narrative and literary allusions. This is something you don't see in Impressionism. You don't see it in Post-Impressionism. In fact, we haven't seen it in French art for most of the 19th century, at least the later part. In fact, that's what happened in the middle of the century. Artists started making art of the modern world, even before Impressionism. Going back to something that was there in the Romantic period. So if you think about like this, flow chart. Did you ever see School of Rock with Jack Black? Remember that the rock and roll flow chart? Like Led Zeppelin, there's lines going down to the other Nirvana, right? And that way over here, there's these people. You could do one of those for modern art, and in fact, people have. And they're kind of cool when you see them, right? But if you think about the flow chart, you could draw a little flow chart line from the Romantics, Jericho, the Rapid Medusa, remember that? Or Delacroix's images of ancient Middle East, narratives from there. You could send dark things, or Fuseli's dream imagery. You could right over here to the symbolists. But the chasm is about a century between the two. That's the same, that's the same. They're picking up sort of what got lost. Okay? So, we left off looking at Rodin. I want to look specifically at one of the people who was associated with the symbolist movement today for the first part of class, and then move on into the 20th century after that. And this is in particular Gauguin, Paul Gauguin. Also began his career working with the Impressionists. He actually exhibited in the last Impressionist show. This should be wrote for you by now, in 1886, right? The last Impressionist show. Gauguin was part of that. So he didn't tie with the group, but again, joined very late. Most of his career, the majority of his career, is after the Impressionist movement broke. And also he's often linked with the post-Impressionists. But personally, he was friends with many of the symbolist poets. And in fact, when one time he was departing Paris for a long trip abroad, we'll talk about this, in the 1890s, and the symbolists got together to have him go away. So he's tight with these people. And as you'll see with his work and his approach to art, there's something about it that has this faux spirituality, right? This weird sort of personal interest in anthropology and some sort of spiritual connection that brings mankind together. That puts him, even more so than Van Gogh, into the realm of the symbolist. And he likes to call himself that as well, as we'll see. Okay? So Gauguin fits the mold and, in fact, does have symbolist connections. He's also well connected with the other post-impressionists. He's very good friends with Vincent van Gogh. They have a long-standing connection. And in fact, Gauguin goes with Van Gogh, or follows Van Gogh, down to Arles in Provence to visit him, because Van Gogh had wanted to when he moved to the south of France. He was getting away from the temptations of Paris, and he wanted to be out in the countryside. And honestly, you couldn't blame him. Provence is beautiful. I mean, it's just gorgeous. It's sunny. It smells nice. Food's great, right? Lots of ocean. But he also found an artist community down there. He wants to be sort of like monks, dedicated to the life of art. And he wants Gauguin to come and visit him. He wants Gauguin to be part of this. And so he wires him, and he says, come down. And kind of pesters him until Gauguin finally shows up, right, 1888. And he gets there, and Van Gogh is so off his nut. He's so, it's such a bad way. That Gauguin stays for like a couple weeks and I can't handle your mood swings, Vinny, right? And I'm out of here, right? And in fact, it was Gauguin's departure from Arles that led Van Gogh to cut off his ear. You guys all know the story about Van Gogh cutting off his ear. There's some myths out there that he did it for a loved one, but in fact, he did it for Gauguin. And I don't know how that was supposed to make him stay around. Paul, please stay. Look what I did for you. Here's my ear. But anyway, I think it probably cemented the separation, if you will. And so here he is in the top portrait with a Japanese pin behind him and his ear bandaged up, having cut it off, following his sadness over the departure of Gauguin. So where does Gauguin go? He leaves Provence behind. He goes to Brittany. If you know your way around France at all, right? I'm trying to do this. That's wrong. But the Belgium and Holland, here's England, right? And Ireland. And this is pretty deep, right? And so up here, there's Holland and Belgium. And then France over there kind of like this, right? And then down here is the boots, right? And then over here is Spain, okay? And then down here. And Arles is sort of there, right? Marseille, where Cézanne is sort of there, right? Paris is kind of here. There, that's London. And Brittany is here, this one. So he's really going to go on all the way to the other side of France, and he's against on both sides, right? So he's finding an equally remote area away from Paris after having this and here. Okay? Why did he choose this region in particular? He tells us. what he was looking for. It's very different from Van Gogh. He's not trying to avoid sin, right? He doesn't have that preacher's background. In fact, the difference between the two is odd that they were friends. Gauguin, we'll see, the guy embraces sin. He loves it. He likes a little naughtiness. But what he's really looking for, not necessarily naughtiness, he's not gone there to live a bohemian lifestyle. What he's interested in is a kind of life that's not been affected by progress. He wants to find a group of people who have somehow made it through without industry, the Industrial Revolution, having impacted them in any way. Impacted by the verb, unless you talk about excuse. Having made an impact on, I shouldn't practice on pet peeves. Right? So they want the people that have not felt the impact of industry. Even though, really, in order to find an area like that, he's got to turn a blind eye to a lot of things, because every place was. Right? But what he focuses on when he goes to Brittany, sitting in kind of Pont-Aven is where his home is a rustic way of life, where people haven't changed through the centuries. So here are little girls from Pont-Aven wearing their local costumes, focusing on these traditional local costumes, the traditional local clogs, the wooden clogs that they wear. They're not Dutch, right? But it proves that they're not wearing leather shoes that might have been made, in some sort of factory. This is the traditional ways of life. And what they're doing is they're enjoying this traditional way of life in the countryside. They're harvested parts of the grain around, and we have to assume that there's workers who are doing that harvesting and making it into the piles. But what he's focusing on are these people that are enjoying this dance of life, right? In this rural setting. He's looking for the primitive. And he thinks that he can find it in these areas that are flung far away from Paris. Right? The industrial, the commercial, the everything modern center. He's not looking for a modern world, right? He's looking for a primitive world, because then he can, when people leave, and this is a theme that was rising in the late 19th century, he believes that if you can find people that are in touch with this sort of primitive lifestyle, you can find people that are also in touch with their supernatural traditions, their spiritual side. That he equates that primitiveness, right, with something primal. And you think this is not unique to Gauguin, nor is it unique to the late 19th century. In 1970 or so, John Lennon from the Beatles, you guys heard of the Beatles, right? I make these references that nobody gets. From intro class, one of the students was talking to Coppola. I'd never heard of Francis Ford Coppola as a godfather. Right? Anyway, John Lennon was having issues. And what was called at that point was a really popular way of therapy. It was called primal screen therapy, where if you scream like a baby at birth or like a caveman, you can somehow get in touch with that essence, that nature that we tend to not be in touch with. Okay? So the idea that the primal side of who we are holds something more truthful, more honest, more spiritual than the logical modern world allows us to. That's something that's really a fairly common theme. And that's what Gauguin is looking for. He's not an anthropologist by any means, but he's investigating local customs with the idea that by understanding these local customs, by getting in touch with them himself, he might discover something greater and more profound about the human condition. Right? So, and we're going to see that he gets more and more involved in this idea. This might look at first as just this really cute, something he saw, right? How is this symbolist? It's the objective world rendered in a subjective way. It's not anything from inside of him, right, that he's exuding outward. Right? It's because not everybody fits easy in their box, right? And we'll see that eventually, very soon, on moving to Brittany, he starts to make pictures that are more about what's inside, right? specifically, have nothing to do with what we see with our physical eyes. So, he's not really interested in theology. He's not interested in religiosity. He's not at all pious. He's interested in primitive superstitions, right? The primitive life as a key to something profound that's beyond what we might be able to observe. Okay. Next. I would be remiss if I didn't show you the dog. I love being a good dog. And this one is just, in fact, Holly's across the hall after our pet doesn't. I didn't put the little dog down last. He looks just like that. Cute, muffy as a dog. Poor girl, give me Basket Bass. Her poor dog died this weekend. What? Yeah, her, Moira. What was the dog's name? Moira? Anyway, she's really helping us, and rightly so, it's the hardest thing in the world. That's it. She's got a little color, right? And, if you know me well enough, you know that whenever I get a dog in a picture, I give you detail. Well, you can see here that all this, very, very shortly, he moves toward these amazing, non-objective colors, entirely subjective in the way that he's painting the colors and in the way he's arranging the composition. Now, notice that he's still focused very much on this traditional Brittany costume, right? The costume of the women in Brittany seem to be fascinating. He loves these hats and the simple, austere, almost Amish-looking robes, right? With the pressed ear flaps. And at the same time, he's also very much interested in a kind of vision that isn't physical, a kind of vision that is spiritual, that is not at all objective, but rather something that you sense inside your head that isn't out there to truly be seen. And we'll talk a bit about that first. But first, my box down there, synthetism. He talked about this. This is his kind of take on post-impressionism, his kind of take on symbolism. He said color is enigmatic, an enigma, right? It's a mystery. And it needs to be used enigmatically, mysteriously. Don't paint too much after nature, he said. Art is an abstraction. Derive this abstraction from nature while dreaming about it. Okay? So in other words, he's not going to start putting colors down because the colors represent what he saw. But rather, colors represent something mysterious. And we talk about mysteries and whatnot. What he's really talking about when he's saying this, he's thinking about the great mysteries of life, the great mysteries of spirituality, the great unanswered questions of humanity. He wants these colors to evoke those things instead. Right? So, synthetism for him was a synthesis of two different things, right? Two different things synthesized, coming together. One, the outward appearance is still kind of part of it, but the artist's feelings about that, this is what he said, he wrote about this too, right? So, outward appearance, the artist's feelings about that, and basic aesthetic concerns. Line, color, form. This is synthetism. You bring these things together, right? And what it ends up with is a style of art where any attempt to render variations in color based on depth perception, which is what you see on the right in the National Gallery picture. You'll notice how the green seems a little non-realistic. It's a bit acid colored, and the purple of that row of probably lavender behind the girl is a bit high-pitched, yeah? And the houses become this sort of pattern of colors with outlines. But this is much more strong when we look at the vision after the surgery, where all of a sudden everything is outlined and filled. It kind of like stained glass in a way, or large-scale mosaics. There's a slang word for this called opus sectile. That's where you make a picture in large pieces of marble that have been cut out to fit different areas, right? But he does some modeling, the hat in the center. But for the most part, the hats are these white areas with this really interesting sort of calligraphic outline. And the red of the ground, of course, is utterly undescriptive of what he truly saw. The tree trunk that runs diagonally through the composition is hardly modeled off as this big brown swath, right? The wings on the angel, we'll talk more about that on the right, the bright yellow wings, also jarringly juxtaposed with the red, but also filled in sort of a flat tone. The angel's costume is the blue, ditto, right? Filled in as a flat tone. And even some of the faces become obscured, so that what he focuses on is that outline, which is usually darker than the rest, not in black per se, but a darker color that forms it, and then sort of, like a children's color by numbers thing, coloring book sort of. So again, it's not about what it looks like, it's about this sort of aesthetic concerns that dominate how he's approaching the work. Right? And to drive this point home, that it's not really about what you see, it's the theme he's chosen. In this case, a theme that is meant to tell a story of sorts. Not a real narrative story with a prologue and an act 1, act 2, act 3, or anything like that. But something that happens. And what he said is that these women that you see, and you notice with the exception of the guy in the lower right corner, they're all women. They have come out of church. They've just come out of church on a Sunday morning. And they've been listening to a sermon, and the fellow at the right, with, as you can see, it looks almost like a monk's hairdo, right? He's the preacher, and they've been listening to him. He's the only man there. And as they come out of church, after having listened to the sermon, they see a couple of people wrestling in the town square. And I have read that this was a tradition in Brittany to have wrestling matches in the town square. Go figure, right? But even in the rest of France, up until the end of the 20th century, deep into the 20th century, on festival days, high holidays, you would have boxing matches as entertainment. So they come out, they see these two guys wrestling, and they are inspired by what they see, based on what they just heard, and they collectively imagine something else. They have a collective vision. And the vision is what they just heard the sermon on, which was Genesis, I forget which chapter, 22, 23, somewhere in there, where Jacob doesn't want to do God's will, and he wrestles with an angel overnight. He's trying to impress on him the importance of doing God's work, right? And they see these two wrestlers, and they don't see the wrestlers at all. They see the sermon. And with this in mind, there are two incredibly important issues that relate to this. And one of them is the idea of a vision that is not really what you see with your physical senses, but a vision that's based on spiritual concerns. That's number one, right? And that's something that puts him more firmly in the camp of the symbols. Number two, the idea of a collective vision. Right? A vision that's shared with other people. That's what he's looking for when he's looking for primitivism, for primitive ways of life. Is he's looking for something that connects us. And many people, when they comment on the modern conditions, the idea of the modern city and whatnot, isolation is a huge part of that. Because what the city has done is put us all together with no connection to each other at the same time. What do you do when you walk by people in the street? You hurt your eyes, don't you? You don't make contact. The loneliest place in the world is a big city. In little towns, you talk to everybody. Big cities, you look the other way. Right? You don't listen to people who yell for help sometimes. I mean, it's not happening much anymore, but it was a big problem. So he's going there looking for this collectivism, right? This idea of a group mentality, something that binds humanism. What binds us all together? And he's finding it in here, how the church sermon is. Bound these women together. Right? Now, the guy on the right, the preacher, who also seems to be sharing the sermon with him, is the one who's obviously inspired this vision, right? He's the reason they're having the vision in the first place. Why? The reason the fiery nature of his sermon, the quality of his sermon, or the moving nature of it is exactly why they've been able to come out of the church and see something and think of something else. And by the way, the spiritual nature of what they're seeing is indicated by all these other things. Look at the horrible scale discrepancies on the left. Notice how much smaller they get quickly. And in the back of me, and then where the heck is that cow? Right? It's standing in front of them. It's smaller than they are. It looks like a dog again. But it's a cow. And again, he's using that scale discrepancy not to describe what it looked like, but to disorient you as the viewer. To reiterate the idea that this is a vision. Right? And the preacher that we see here is the one who's responsible for that. For kicking you out of the comfort of the observed world and putting you into the discomfort, the lack of logic of the visionary world. And lo and behold, that preacher is a self-portrait of Gauguin. That's what he looks like. He's got limpid eyes like that and a hook nose. And he did quite a few self-portraits. There he is, from the National Gallery. And you see the similarity. Right? That's him. And he wants you to know it's him. He doesn't try to obscure it. So that's a really fascinating issue with this picture is, when you think about it, in the picture, the preacher is the one who has done what it takes to get the women to have a vision. Right? He's the one who has inspired them to see the spiritual in the everyday. And it's him. And isn't that what the painter's supposed to do anyway? In the symbolic movement, is be the one that makes you see the spiritual instead of the everyday. So it's really a complicated painting this way. One that's really quite fascinating. Because just as the preacher inspires the women, so the painter inspires us to look at our world and not see what you're supposed to see, but to see spiritual elements of it. With that in mind, the women on the left and their vision on the right are separated by that tree. And that tree is an apple tree. Okay? Why an apple tree?
Usually apple, we don't know which fruit Adam and Eve ate, but apple is usually associated with that.
Bingo, exactly. The apple tree is associated with original sin, right? It's the tree of knowledge. And if they think about it, they're looking past the tree of knowledge. So the tree of knowledge is the tree of life. Tree of knowledge, right? They're looking past the tree of knowledge. And if you think about what Gauguin's trying to get at, he's trying to get at this idea that there is knowledge to be found if we get away from our physical vision. There's other knowledge we found elsewhere. So there's that reference. But then there's also the reference of temptation. That the tree, as you mentioned, is central to the story of Adam and Eve. It's where that's the source of their temptation. I mean, Satan is. That he uses that, right? Does that make Gauguin Satan as well? Has he tempted them somehow? Because people have looked at the two-dimensional surface of this painting, because look how much he wants to look at this painting as an arrangement of two-dimensional shapes. That tree kind of grows from him. Look where it's going down to his feet. Right? So, even though there's no serpent here, is Gauguin kind of implying that maybe, just maybe, art is temptation? And certainly with the symbolists, what we find is that they, again, don't distinguish between good and bad. They don't see bad as, the occult, or sin, or Satanism even for that matter, as being a negative thing. What they see it as is a pathway to something more spiritual. And Gauguin is aware of this as a modern way of thinking and investigating those things together. So part of me thinks that he's playing with these different ideas, but he's not locking anything down. Right? He's left it still kind of open to, if we go this way, if we go that way. And that's also a hallmark of being a symbolist, is not to give us a single symbolism, but to give us an art that evokes countless ideas. It makes it very strong. As he's interested in these customs of Brittany, and this idea that you might see the spiritual and something spiritual instead of what's really there, here he gives us a tradition in Brittany was to have at road corners, and you still see these today, at major intersections, there'll be a shrine with an old crucifix there. And you find this went through a lot of Northern Europe. I remember when I was in Belgium, you see all the time there. And so here he shows us one of these roadside shrines. And again, three Breton women praying in front of it. And what we assume is what we're looking at is their vision, where Christ has become not an inert wood or stone statue, but looks as if he's really Jesus. You know? And the background, again, has that sort of unnatural coloring and unnatural perspective and a certain flattening of the surface. Look at the trees. The trees are wonderful, but they become these sort of just shapes with a single filament that's his synthetism. And other things you don't know, there's two women behind the wall there, and who's that guy going over the wall? It's kind of mysterious that way, you know? But doesn't he kind of look like Gauguin as well, Jesus, in this case? He's got a little bit of that look about him. Not quite so much of a hook nose, but the eyes are getting there. And it's very that horsey face, right, that Gauguin has. And I think he's definitely sort of working that idea, because we're seeing a lot of images that he is trying to say that he is this Savior and sinner. Think about the one we just saw, right? He's the preacher, but he's also the tempter. And here, again, he's inspired their visions, but he's also inspired our visions as well. It's a very complicated way he puts himself into these pictures and puts himself forward within them. So we also add into that, maybe he's thinking about the artist as being a great martyr to something bigger, you know? And through that martyrdom can help through the civilization as a whole. In this case, he said that the yellow conveyed his feelings about Brittany. He said that it was actually symbolic for him. It's kind of a personal symbolism, he said. That yellow for him represented the isolation of this region of France on the map, how far out it is, right, from the rest. But it also relates, in many ways, to local superstitious culture. The Breton people, the people of Brittany, associated the calendar year with the life of Christ. They said each of the seasons was part of the life of Christ. And that summer was Christ's adulthood. The fall was Christ's torture and death, his passion. The winter was the time he spent dead. And the spring represented resurrection. Because things come back to life, right? That's what the Breton culture said. And what he's done here is he's associated now this vision of Christ on the cross, his passion, right, with the colors of the landscape, the fall colors of the landscape. So he's certainly tying in these supernatural themes from Breton culture into what he's depicting here. So again, it's not theological in the grand scheme of things. He's not like Van Gogh, where he's got some deep-seated religious beliefs, but rather he's interested in religion as a superstition, as a humanist pursuit that ties people together, the women on the counter, who become one in their understanding of the relationship between Christ at his moment of death, inspired by something he's seen, and the changing seasons of the year. There's something very primitive about that. Well, it's all coming together in a wonderful self-portrait from the National Gallery, where we see the disembodied head of Gauguin with a halo, right? And at the same time, hanging directly behind his head are two apples, right? So is he the serpent that's offering us the apple? You know, are we Adam and Eve looking at him? And is he getting to us and saying, I'm a And you'll notice that there's this flower that's been very stylized and abstract. The yellow leaves or the yellow flowers of the square yellow flower. And it goes through its fingers almost like he's holding a cigarette. And then as it comes out the other side, it turns into a serpent. Right? And he's controlling the serpent. And he's got that apple behind him. He is the tempter. But on the other hand, he's a saint. And he's got a halo. And the disembodied head with the yellow around it, like John the Baptist, who had his head cut off, maybe. You know, oblique references to these things. And again, that sensitive color, where everything is laid down in these incredible, super saturated colors that aren't about description, but instead are very much about the emotional, the spiritual impact that they might have, or even kind of a personal spirituality, a personal metaphysics that Gauguin is bringing to the art. And I've got, it's stuff my camera and got a really great picture of his eye, and also because it's so creepy. And we'll find that Gauguin is actually is a bit of a creep, as we'll find out, in his personal biography. But again, the whole thing is about non-objective vision. It's all about what we feel inside and trying to project that onto the canvas, and increasingly moving in that direction, where the figures might have some small tenuous link to what you might see around you, but in fact, the whole point is something very, very different from that. So what we're looking at is a Gauguin who has gone to Brittany in search of something primitive, a way of life that is an antidote to the city, right? A way of life that has preserved itself despite the progress of the machine, or the machine age, the progress of the industry, that has survived despite that. And in Brittany, he's beginning to find it. And he's ignoring those elements of life in Brittany where you might see a railroad station, you know, or a factory building, or a busy port. And what he's focusing on is agrarian populations and their connection with the land. And again, in a quasi-spiritual way. His interest in finding a primitive culture leads him even further afield. And he winds up in Tahiti, which was a colony of France, French Polynesia, at this time. And he stays in Tahiti first from 1891 to 93, comes back to Paris for a bit, then goes back and dies. Think of syphilis, or gonorrhea, some sexually transmitted disease, but regardless. He goes back to Tahiti, he spends 2 years there to begin with, and what he's done, after his first little foray into Tahiti, doing the same thing he was doing in Brittany, which is looking for local cultures, right? Looking for local traditions, local superstitions. He comes back to Paris, 1893, after spending 2 days there. He comes back to Paris with 66 paintings of Tahitian subjects. Now, since it was a colony, there were a lot of French outposts. There were a lot of modern ports. There were cities that were built for the expats that were living there that were perfectly contemporary. He never paints one of them. He turns his back on them and he focuses on local Tahitian culture as an uninterrupted link to Adam and Eve, you know? And he brings these things back to Paris with himself, 1893, right? 66 paintings of Tahitian subjects, all of the titles, I think every one of them is in Tahitian, and it's written on the canvas in Tahitian. And that means that anybody in Paris who's looking at this goes like, Parawa, Matsubua, I don't know what it means. And he wants it to remain entirely mysterious to them, right? At a certain level. He wants to cloud the directness of what he's trying to illustrate here. Certainly what you're most struck with, I think, like in Brittany, are the colors. They're just phenomenal. The colors here are. And that purple on the ground, for example, and the way that it swirls around her feet, or that coral red and green in front of the figure behind her, with those horrible hands with that massive, massive foot. Do you see that back there? Yeah, that's an incredible circle if you can. I can see what I know what I'm looking for. Right? 10. That's a foot, right? Back in there. And that kind of frightening look on her face is lit from below, and there's no light down there. As you can see, the tops of her eyebrows, or the tops of her eyelids are lit, right? On the other side of the brow. And that kind of frightening look, and then the way the trees in the background, he's really obviously enamored with this tropical geography, but still the trees turn into things almost like a unicorn or something, or some kind of dragon leaning up behind it. Something about this really, really creepy. It may be, yeah. You can't tell for sure though, but it's, or it could be just a nod of a tree. Sorry? She's looking over what's going on behind me, right? Yeah, and the question is she looking toward that, or is it the woman on the ground, and is the woman on the ground up to something that we're not quite sure what yet, right? The woman kneeling on the ground. It's all very creepy in a big way, right? But again, we see him doing the things he was doing before, which is interested in these unnatural colors, focusing on local customs, looking for some sort of metaphysical significance in the local culture that we see here. And to drive that point home, the titles that he chooses are all derived from local folklore. So he's interviewing people that are down there, and he's finding out their local myths, which are very non-Western, right? And maybe that's what helped get him there from Brittany, is this idea that Brittany's all well and good, very primitive in its way, but you know what? It's Christianity, and that's just kind of traditionally European. Let's go down here. Let's go find something different. Let's go find something even less affected with European, or less affected by European civilization. But again, it's all myth-making, making it up, because, in fact, it already had been affected by European civilization, by settlers. Right? Now, I know I had that. The title of the work, what that translates into is Words of the Devil. Right? So what Gracie was saying in the back about the look on her face is that we are, I think, meant to see that the title reflects what she's listening to, the words of the devil. And the question is, what is speaking the words of the devil? Is it that witch-like figure with the distorted hands and feet and the frightening eyes and the face that looks like a mask, right? Or like someone in a trance? Maybe the thing about trying to possess her and maybe not successfully yet. Or is there something else? Is she finding it in the landscape itself? Certainly this idea of it being the words of the devil goes back to the theme that we saw with the vision after the sermon, right? Where, I'll give you a second, okay? In the vision after the sermon, we saw that they had, that the idea of original sin was really kind of one of the underlying themes, just as it is in the top portrait here, right? Adam and Eve, and the devil that speaks to them and gets them to sin, right? So the words of the devil may have everything to do with that, and it seems as if he's trying to pull those themes in here, where instead of the Garden of Eden, we've got this jungle, right? This tropical paradise that presents itself. And maybe she's not hearing the woman. Maybe she's hearing nature, that pantheistic idea that, nature speaks to you. And she's listening to that as well. And I would like to argue, and I'll get Demetrius' comment, is that the look on her face is just coy enough to not be entirely suspicious, but rather to sort of like it. You can read it two ways, where she might be seduced by what she hears, rather than frightened by what she hears. Demetrius. I can't tell you for sure. Yeah, that green and red thing here. Yeah, I have never been anywhere tropical. I went to Egypt once. Right, I've seen palm trees a few times in my life, but I honestly have no idea. I don't really see the same. I mean, we can go down and look at it together, right? But I don't really see the sands per se in this area down here. And sometimes you can see that those marks could be marks from, lots of kind of questioning is probably, if you're going to do a term maker on this, and by the way, thank you. But if you're ever going to do a term maker on this, what you do is go find a botanist and show the picture that is there anything that could possibly be plant related? Because part of that is my core animal related is kind of flowers, right? Find somebody who knows their plants and knows their tropical environment. What is that thing? Is it a plant? That's what I do. Watching up National Geographic specials where things look like eyes as a form of protection, on the back of a turtle, or sometimes with its flowers and plants.
That's an odd place for eyes. I'm a reporter, so I think it's usually towards the bottom.
Right. Unless it's a decorative like you see on the back of a cobra. And that's, maybe that's it too. Maybe the cobras are dry, right? Aren't cobras arid, not humid?
But, red and green is heavily used in the African art, and it could be an abstract form of snake. There are other snakes in Africa that's not overrated.
I remember the word Polynesia here, right? In the ocean. But the interesting thing about that is that around the same time, which I don't know if before or after the picture, but there was a museum, an ethnographic museum still there. Trocadero, just kind of across the Seine from that. And a lot of French artists right around 1900 started going there and saying, they didn't say, Richard not in the first place, is to find a sector of the world that isn't unpolluted by Western tradition. Okay, you need to look at breaking away from Western tradition. That kind of back to modernism. The whole point of modernism is that, hey, the traditions don't serve the modern world. So on there for this. With that in mind, you could easily go to the ethnographic museum and pull some of those ideas in. Either way we push it, remember what we've seen with the South Park Care or the Mission African Sermon is that it doesn't have to represent anything. With Gauguin, there is the possibility that he said, I like the color yellow because it reminds me of isolation. I don't like the yellow. It's that prerogative, right? So that, there could be, as much as anything, just a compositional element that says, these movements maybe doesn't represent anything. I don't allow that possibility too. I don't know if I agree with it, but we have to allow that as we're looking for something we may be wasting our energy. And wasting first. I'm sure one of our Gauguin questions is, we know quite a bit about the things we're talking about, the fact that those things coming up that are really kind of fascinating about the world. So,
it seems like he has, and I've noticed it sort of, like when you circle it, I didn't really notice this one out, but it looks like a hand right underneath it.
It looks very much like the hands of that woman. I think that's a woman kneeling behind her, right?
And he has the red and yellow with
right.
that hand.
That's it right there.
No, right, literally where your circle ends, it kind of crosses right in between.
Oh, right there? Is that right there?
Oh,
no. Okay, well.
It looks like a red star.
Right there.
Right there, yeah.
Okay.
I right?
Yeah.
And then it seems like he has them this one, and then the other one, the red, there is a red and white combo.
That's right. Yeah.
And then even in his other one, the fourth one.
So this is very much the exact same shape as the hand holding the serpent there. And this is also begins to echo these flowers, right?
The red and green, and the orange, the apple. And then he got it in the other one, too, but I didn't notice it until now. On other paintings, he has the exact same.
And what's also fascinating is that some of these colors, some of these shapes, they just come from also the batik fabric that you've seen down there too. You know, it's pulling these things together. I think it's a really wonderful connection that I hadn't thought about. Because again, one of the things that says, okay, there's a light coming through. Well, this idea of the world, these are all going to help us to understand, I think, what symbolism really is all about, you know, and how it's this movement that is looking for these overlapping and interlacing spiritual, metaphysical qualities, right? And Gauguin is one of these artists who I think we've already seen takes things and laces them through the course of his career. He works them through in ways where they appear and reappear as he works on these. This is a sculpture from the National Gallery called Eve, and you can see that our figure has certain similarities to this one as well. So I think that he's also weaving in Christian mythologies. I don't say mythologies because that's the way Gauguin would see them. Christian mythologies into these pictures as well. So in many ways, he's sort of like an Eve figure hearing the words of the devil. Because after all, you know, the devil doesn't talk to Adam, right? In the Bible, the devil talks to Eve, and Eve talks to Adam. And that focus on Eve is also this symbolist focus on the femme fatale, right? Remember Pandora, the woman that causes the downfall of man. It's so misogynist, right? Sure. We do it ourselves. We do it because you guys told us to. Okay, it's listening, but it's really your fault, right? And he's tying that into this by calling it words of the devil and putting it in this primeval forest, right? Instead of giving us a serpent, he gives us that figure or these other things that relate to it, right? That said, at the same time, he takes the pose and derives it from ancient statues of Venus, the goddess of love, who was born from nature, born from the ocean itself. And there was a fairly standard form of Venus that developed in the 4th century BC where she's, it's called the Venus Pudicata, which simply means there's a sort of humble Venus where even though she's naked, she's trying to cover herself up. She's got her hands placed just right. And you'll notice that what Gauguin has done is he's done this more or less. Right? He gives her that listening pose with the hand on her cheek, considering the words of the devil. But he still has the other hand coming down in a way that resembles quite closely the hand of Venus from numerous statues. Right? So we keep these things in mind that what he's doing is he's like an anthropologist who sees in human mythologies links that relate to the human condition. That's what Gauguin's kind of doing as well. By bringing them all together and saying, hey, this maybe tells us something about ourselves. Now here's where it gets creepy. When he went there to Tahiti, he wanted to live, off the grid. And he took up with one of the local populations, one of the local tribes, to live out in the backwoods. He set up his house, decorated it with carvings and tables and whatnot. And as he became more closely accepted by this tribe, they gave him a gift of one of the young girls from the tribe to his wife. And by the way, Gauguin's got a wife. He's got 2 kids. He left them behind to go to Tahiti. That's way back in France, but he takes this young girl. She's like 13. And he's her first. Right? And if you think about what he's changed here, that she's covering up her crotch with a rag. He's deflowered her. And so this is the part that's really creepy and why a lot of us, when we start to teach Gauguin, don't like it very much because there's something about him that's really just off-putting. And so if we go back to what we thought about Gauguin, that we saw with the self-portrait or with the vision after the sermons, what we saw was a Gauguin who presents himself as the person who tempts, the person who sins, but the person is also a saint. The person is also a martyr. And many of those things are coming out even in the Tahitian pictures. Right? Where are the words of the devil being spoken by the figure in the background, by the trees, or are they spoken by Gauguin? Is he that tempter and inspirer that we saw in the preacher in the corner of the vision after the sermon, or the disembodied head of his self-portrait? Is that who he is? Right? By the way, around the door he carved, and it's up in, I want to say it's in Paris, the wood that he carved around the doorway. The houses there, they sat on stilts because of floodwaters and the possibility of high tides and storms blowing things. So it sat on about 8 feet up off the ground, these thatched huts with wooden thatched huts. And you climb these stairs in, and that's where you would be inside. It was mostly open because it's warm all the time. And around the door, he had carved some of the wood with these symbols and words coming around the side. Basically, it was in French, so natives would understand it. He called the house of sexual pleasure in French. Maison English, but black word, you can tell us exactly what it is. I can't remember the word that he uses, but the word is not just fun. It's derived from the verb for fun in French. And in French, it means sexual fun, erotic fun, right? And that's what he called his house. And that's the sort of embrace of sinfulness that is part of the symbolist movement. They're not judgmental about the forms of spirituality they talk about. Right? They want to incorporate all that. Yeah.
Are we certain that the figure in the back is a woman?
No, I just keep saying woman. It could be a boy as well.
Could it be he himself?
See Gauguin? I think when Gauguin wants us to see Gauguin in pictures, he gives us more solid clues. I don't think it looks enough like him to be Gauguin. His eyes are smaller in the sockets and surrounded on the bottoms as well as the top of those radiating circles of puffy, limpid fattiness, you know. And it's not quite forcing enough. He's got an amazingly long chin, you know, very, very crispy. It doesn't look enough like him to be him. And then the skin of the figure as well has shared with her. So part of me thinks that I think it's a she, and it's, I don't know why. I wouldn't even see anything that's something different. But I've always sort of thought of it as a she. And maybe it's the way that around the head reminds me of something like a scarf that women wear over the head. But I've also thought about her as the nanny, the keeper, you know, the tutor of that thing. And believe me, the Gauguin literature is huge. And you can probably find just about any solution you wanted to out there. Supported by one stuff or another because he's left it wisely.
Could it be her pastor, possibly?
Yeah, I guess it could be. I think that if you were in class and you were going to do that, I would tell you to put something in the picture that tightens that connection a bit. And I think that if Gauguin wanted us to see a tight connection between them, there might be something there that gave us the sense of it before and after.
Well, the flower scene and the water and the bottom.
Yeah, if it's water, right?
The thing on the bottom, the purple thing is just that sort of, like,
sort of, yeah.
line, maybe.
You know, and the thing about the red on the ground too is, and this has been brought up by a lot of scholars, and I'm sorry, it is menstruation of a very young girl being initiated on a certain level, or the idea of virginal blood being still. That's like, you know, is that what the ground is? And then all those swirls, the swirls of sand, are they the swirls of waves? Are they sperm? I mean, these are all possibilities. Knowing that Gauguin called his house, you know, the house of sexual fun. So, yeah, these are wide open questions, right? And by the way, the red is not, it's really much more orange than red. Keep in mind in this class that whenever we see things up on the screen, it is about 10 different digital reconstructions away from the original, right? So my camera, my Photoshop, my computer, to that projector, right? And any one of those steps can skew things. Oh, this is pretty good, but it's nothing substitutes referencing in person. Well, we're almost done with symbolism, and some of it oversimplified my class. Going back a bit, when Gauguin was in Brittany, before he went off to Tahiti, he was working with this other artist named Paul Seruzier, and he encouraged Seruzier to try to explore mysticism in nature. And I think that's obviously something that Gauguin is trying to do here in Tahiti still. But he told Seruzier, and this is sort of funny in a way, he said, you've got to abandon representation. You've got to stop making your painting look like what you see and push it toward where it is just these colors that evoke these ideas and thoughts, right? The simplest agenda. And he pushes them to the point where Seruzier does something that Gauguin would never, ever do, which is basically make a painting that if you didn't know that it was supposed to be a landscape, you would never recognize it as one. It just looks like color. And it becomes increasingly difficult. Okay, there might be blue of the sky above and some reflection down below, and those blue horizontal streaks through the middle might be trees, and the red might be a little bit, honestly, right? It's a composition of colors with very little regard for representation. Even though Seruzier titled it originated, the landscape of the Bois d'Amour, the forest of love, Bois d'Amour, right? At Provence. Now that might be the name of a real place and not related to Gauguin's idea of a forest of love. But still, what happened is that Seruzier and Gauguin, and this is again probably back a few years, they both believed that actually he had done something here, and he was able by this to get his paintings to have a spiritual quality all their own, where they had a life. And this is why they call it a talisman. A talisman is a sculptural icon that you wear that's believed to have the presence of whatever's depicted in it in the icon and can ward off evil, right? It's kind of the idea of what the medieval world, the kind of emphasis they put on relics or sometimes on images, such as images of saints that can see. Right? A talisman is something that has inner life, that is not an inert object, even though it's a man-made thing. And they began to call this painting their talisman, right? Because he had gotten far enough away from representation to truly discover that eternal mystery, that metaphysical element that is there but can't be seen. And that theme of moving past representation to discover spirituality. That spirituality is hidden because we're confused by what we see around us. We're distracted, right? You look out and you see cars, and you see cows, and you see grass. And as long as that's all you see, you're not going to see the hand of God. Whoever that God is for you. Right? You're distracted by the world, and you can't see the hand of God until you start to focus on it. How do you focus on it, the hand of God, if you're looking at the stuff around you? Well, many people believe that the hand of God is reflected through that. But it can be distracting. How can you get past that and see something that is purely non-polluted with the world? You need something abstract. And that will be a thing that we see with artists throughout the 20th century. To get to spiritual, you've got to get past the physical. Right? The physical reminds us of where we are. And if you want an art that puts you somewhere else, it can't represent the world around you. So really, it's way out there, man. This is 30 years, no, 20 years, 25 years before anybody else gets it. Before anyone else pushes past representation. And this is about the only thing he ever did. I mean, there's very few other pictures by him, but he pulled it off this one. And Gauguin saw it, and he helped him get there, and saw what it meant in a really important way. Right? It has mystical qualities. So this idea that there are mystical qualities in the world around us, and maybe part of what we need to do is get past that, is find that mysticism that's shared by all of the symbolists that we looked at. I wanted to quickly show you two other painters in Paris, connected to Gauguin and Cerisier, who are also doing this, but remain a little bit more involved with urban scenes and a little bit more involved with what you can see around you, but still have this symbolist idea of the mystery that lies behind what we see. And the first of these is Edward Vuillard. Like Vuillard. We have a lot of Vuillard pictures around here. Duncan Phillips, the guy who founded the Phillips Collection, loved Vuillard. And there must be at least a dozen up there. Not all of his letters. We have quite a few at the National Gallery. This one, as you can probably tell from the frame, is tiny, like that, right? But he focused on these interior scenes where, like Cerisier and like Gauguin, he is simplifying things and abstracting them in a certain way with these simple outlines, patches of unvaried color, like the bed in the foreground, for example, or the titular yellow curtain, or even the outline of this ponytailed housekeeper who's pulling back the curtain. But what Vuillard is doing is beginning to look at this idea that in everyday activity, there is this sense of mystery and wonder. And here, just the fact that she's pulling back this curtain, and is that supposed to be a window behind there? It's just a display of flowers and this display of colors with no explanation, right? And it's like she's looking around it. I think it's probably her toilet. And by toilet, I mean wash basin counter thing, right? Because it looks like a mirror, doesn't it? Upper edges here. Yeah. But there's still something about it. There's something behind that mirror, or behind that curtain, that is special and wonderful and fascinating and mysterious. You don't ever see it. I don't mean mysterious and scary. Right? Mysterious is unknown. That in the everyday we are is finding fascinating, right? And wonderful. And he's working in Paris. After Gauguin goes off to Tahiti, right? Cerisier goes back to Paris from Brittany, yeah? And he shares a studio with Vuillard. So they're working side by side, elbow to elbow. So all these ideas that Gauguin has been developing up in Brittany are now translated and transfused into a group of Parisian painters through Cerisier. He works his way down there. And Vuillard, in 1890, with Cerisier and a few other artists, form a secret society of artists. I love this idea. Artists going back to the middle of the 19th century formed a secret society. No one will know who that is, you know. And they call themselves the Nabis. And that word, Nabis, is the Hebrew word for prophet. And they see themselves, they see making of art as being like a prophet. Go back to what Gauguin was saying, right? That's it in a nutshell. He's the preacher. He's the painter. He's the one who has the vision and helps you to understand what it all means. Right? Painters do the same thing. A painter's job is to, right to today, Brianna, your job is to help people understand something that they don't understand without looking at your art, right? That's what you tried to do with your big mural. You tried to make them understand something they wouldn't understand if they hadn't looked at it. Right? Demetrius Box, it's the same idea. You're trying to help people understand something that they can't see with their own eyes. You're giving them a vision. You're a prophet. Right? You're bringing a message of a better way. Right? A message of understanding something that hopefully makes the world a better place. The Nabis, right, or the Nabi, are highlighting this connection. Right? They are the connection between your understanding and the spiritual world. So if we are as part of this, we love these scenes of everyday life where it's kind of mysterious and wants you to see past it and understand it. Maybe there is wonder out there to be seen. That's what I love about VR, is that I start to look at the world around me and go, you know what? Don't take it all for granted. It's kind of nice. Good things to be seen out there. Another one times we are saying it sense. I mean, how some of this stuff don't have much. There's again the housekeeper on the right bending over a table. Simple scene, right? She's just setting the table. Another woman, looking at her bath. But what he's done is he's turned it into this wonderful sort of pattern of rectilinear shapes across the canvas that are filled with these different tones. And again, gives everything the sense of wonder within the everything. Finally, the last artist who was part of the Nabi movement is Bonnard, Pierre Bonnard. And you know me and my dogs, right? And so here is this wonderful, this vertical picture, where again, there's the trash man's wheelbarrow, right? An open door, and like we are, he translated into these vast, and I go down this way, translated into these vast planes of a single color. But when we look at it, we look at the deserted street, we're reminded of sort of what's not to be seen, what's there despite nothing, And again, Bonnard was in that same studio with Vuillard and Seruzier. They all worked together, sharing the same artistic studio at the same time in 1890. Right? So the Nabi are another of these offshoots of the Symbols movement. Now we're out of time, and I'm quite well behind. I'm going to put a couple things up on some international symbolists that are worthwhile knowing online. We'll start with Fauvism on, what's today? Tuesday, right? Today's Tuesday, yeah? Don't say Friday, it just confused me.
Sorry.
I will continue with Fauvism on Friday. We'll get caught up somewhere along the line. Gracie. Again, tiny picture, right? It's like this. Yeah. I'll try and get us up to the Phillips at some point, this term, because it's worthwhile going when we get a little bit deeper into it, because they've got a really strong 20th century collection, even better than what's down at the National Gallery. Right. And if you want to see more of who we are, Gracie, email me and I'll send you some photos. Right? I think it's terrific. I just ask, and this is because I can, right? It's too much symbolism, but you know what? You should see us we are, because he's such a... Okay, I'll see you guys on Friday.